So, next speaker. Maybe the schedule is a 40 minutes speech and 20 minutes Q&A. And in addition to that, we had a discussion altogether. Morning speaker and Professor and second speaker of the afternoon is GVC Naidu, Professor GVC Naidu. And I asked him to make a self-introduction, and also we are interested in his school and university. So just give the remark about your university. Then start the talk for 40. Yeah. Professor Naidu, please.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. At the outset, I would like to thank profusely Professor Anagawa for giving me this opportunity to be here. This is my first ever visit to Keio Business School, Keio University, in fact, though I've been several times to Japan. And I'm also thankful to Professor Michimi, whom I know for several years, for recommending my name to give a speech here. And thanks to my young friend, Dr. Nagawa. He is one of those upcoming India experts. So I consider he's number 2 after Abe-san, when it comes to pro-India. So he's very, very pro-Indian. Thanks to all of you for coming here. Professor Anagawa-san asked me to introduce myself briefly. I am a professor in the School of International Studies, Nehru Daigaku, that's located in Delhi. It's the number 1 university in India. And the school where I belong to has got 13 centers, different areas we specialize in, American studies and European studies and African studies like that. And then the center I belong to is recently created center. It's called Center for Indo-Pacific Studies. So the idea was to bring in, in a way inspired by what your Prime Minister, who is a little controversial here, but is very, very popular in India. He talked about confluence of 2 oceans when he came last time to Delhi while addressing the Indian Parliament. So the confluence of Indian oceans is an old concept. So historically, if you really look at the movement of people, movement of cultures, movement of religions, almost everything, it flowed back and forth between Indian Ocean, Eastern Indian Ocean, primarily from India to the east of India, that's East Asia. And I was in Kyoto, I came back this morning, I saw some of the temples, I could relate myself, the Indian connection, all over in East Asia. So that's, the idea of bringing, India closer to East Asia and bringing East Asia closer to India. So bringing Indian Ocean and Pacific Ocean closer to each other. So that's why we started, I took the initiative in starting this new center called Center for Indo-Pacific Studies. So in the School of International Studies where I teach, we have nearly about 90 faculty members. It's a pretty big school. And in that we have 13 centers. And then we also have about 1,200 students. Out of 1,200, about 200 students are doing their masters. We don't have undergraduate courses in this university. It's basically masters and research-oriented university. And we have about 1,000 students who are pursuing their PhDs in just one school I'm talking about, in the School of International Studies. This is very briefly about my school and my university. Of course, there are so many other schools, School of Social Sciences and School of Languages, where Japanese language is extremely popular, and School of Computer Sciences, School of Physical Sciences, Natural Sciences, Life Sciences. I mean, there are various schools, but primarily it is research-oriented. The teaching component is not as great as in traditional universities, what you find, because we don't have undergraduate courses. So this is briefly about myself and my university. The topic of my talk today is Japan-India relations. And when Professor Anagawa-san got in touch with me, so he just mentioned underutilized relationship. So probably that would have been more I could not have given a more appropriate title. If you really look at it, it's really underutilized relationship. I explain why it is underutilized. Thanks to Professor Nagawa for insightful title. Probably I would not have come up such a bright title anyway. So what I'm going to do is next 40 odd minutes, try to be as quick as possible so that we'll have more time for discussion. I'll give like a brief outline of where exactly the bilateral relationship between India and Japan is headed in. Okay. Wherever you want to stop, ask me questions so that you are clear. I am also clear. Sorry. In the morning, Professor Michimi-san asked me about history issue. It's a big issue here. It keeps recurring and recurring. So let me start with history. Perhaps some of you may not be aware of the old the historical connection, especially during Second World War. If you really look at some data given, I thought you might be interested in this. India contributed about 700,000 troops for the war in the Pacific. That is under we were still under British, but the largest mobilization of war forces, the military force was from India. 1 million troops were mobilized during Second World War. Out of that 1 million, 700,000 were deployed in East Asia, what they call Far East Command, under the British, to fight the Japanese. So across entire East Asia, wherever Japanese were there, Indians went and fought along with the British. Okay, so 50,000 Indian troops died in that war, probably more than any other single nationality in one war. It was Indian forces, because such a large number, they were instrumental in liberating most of East Asia at that time, Second World War. Okay, and it's not that they went and fought Japan or Japanese forces somewhere else. Parts of India also came under Japanese occupation. Not many people probably aware of that. Northeast, India's Northeast, we talked about Northeast development. Japanese were given special privilege in Northeast. We have the Second World War connection in Northeast. Northeast came under Japanese occupation during the entire war. It was under Japanese occupation. Andaman Nicobar Islands, which are slightly on our in the eastern seas, in the Bay of Bengal, they were under Japanese occupation. Madras city, you must have heard of Madras, nowadays it's called Chennai. It was bombarded by Japanese Air Force. It's not that we didn't have any connection with Japan. We did have some connection. It may not be complete occupation, because probably Japanese were already overstretched in. But Japanese soldiers fought one of the fiercest battles in the Northeast. In fact, the British say that in their annals of empire, the fiercest battle was fought in Northeast. That's between Indian and Japanese troops. Of course, it was headed by the British. Yet, that is the point. If you really look at it, yet, there has never been any time, either in the past or in the present, any dislike of Japanese. This is the irony. When you look at from my perspective, how come I can go any part of this, especially Northeast Asia? There's so much about history, so much about digging into the past and talking about all sorts of issues. When it comes to India, despite all these, absolutely no problem at all. Indians like Japanese like anything. I'll give you statistics if you want. That I think enormous empathy. It's huge. You have to seem to be believed. You go to any of you, any time you go to India, ask anybody in the street, hey, what do you think of Japanese? First thing he says, oh, it's a huge economy, developed economy. Number two, he says that technology. They are the best. Number three, they're peace-loving country. Yeah, I'm not joking. Please, you try it out. Look at the public opinion polls. That's the impression you get in. Why is that? What is that there that really makes Indians like Japanese? So I want to go back a little deeper into history before Second World War. For the first time, 1905, it's a major incident as far as India is concerned. The first time an small Asian country defeated a mighty European, metropolitan country. The defeat of Russia was for the first time Indians took note of Japan. Otherwise, small little country somewhere there, it never really occurred to the Indians. First time, they looked at from a different perspective. Look at this small little country in Asia, which could defeat a mighty European country. So that was the beginning of take note of Japan in India. It had enormous impact on the nationalist leaders who were fighting for freedom from the British. And they even went to the extent of passing resolutions in support of what Japan had done in defeating Russia. So that was the beginning of, looking at Japan in an entirely different perspective. The second incident, India-Japan, what I call romance. This is, very, very important phase about, about more than 100 years back, 120 years back, when Tenshin Okakura-san, when he came to Calcutta, he lived there for more than 2 decades. That was the hub of all the intellectual activity in the entire, Asian region. There's no other, city you can think of where, heavy philosophical and intellectual debate took place. This is where, the first time the intellectuals of India and Japanese, especially Okakura-san, they came out with brilliant ideas. Asia is one. We are Asia. We need to create our identity. The idea of Asian identity was born there. The Asian values. Nobody ever talked about Asian values. It's the Europeans who gave, oh, you're all Asians. But the identity in terms of values, and more importantly, the concept of Asianism was born there. So that is very, very important. So we'll take a lot of inspiration from those intellectual discourses that took place. And then second major development, the way Japanese wore through all the colonial countries across East Asia, especially Southeast Asia. The British, the Dutch, and the Americans, the French, you name it, the Portuguese, everyone was thrown out, just like that. That really is, hey, look at again this country, could defeat all of them at one go. If Japan could defeat, why not we become friendly with Japan to kick out the British from India? That was the beginning of Subhash Chandra Bose's connection with Japan. That's how Subhash Chandra Bose came to Japan, and then started the famous INA, Indian National Army, and his ashes are still in Tokyo. We're ready to take them back. So that is the different kind of connection, and that came to Japan. So Japan was looked at not as an occupier, as an anti-colonial crusader. It's looked at as a liberator. So ever since, it's entirely different perception, although parts of India came under Japanese occupation. So once the Cold War ended, you know the story, the famous dissenting note by Indian judge. He's the only one who said, hey, what you're doing is legally incorrect. There's no law to indict somebody. You want to create a law, create it and indict. But existing law was insufficient, so it's illegal. You argued purely on legal grounds, not because of political grounds. Okay, very well known. And second, Nehru. Nehru was the first prime minister, head of the state, to say that, hey, enough is enough. Japan suffered enough. No war reparations from Japan because of its occupation or whatever. Okay. And then a series of proactive steps that New Delhi took. Several of them, not many people realize that. India was instrumental. The first international agreement that Japan signed after occupation was with India. It was a peace agreement. India refused to participate in San Francisco, saying that that's a Cold War arrangement. We don't want to get into Cold War. We want to have a separate agreement with Japan. So it was the first international agreement that Japan signed was with India. When every country, and more importantly, 1955, okay? 1955, already Japan had become very close ally of the US, and everyone looked at as part of the Cold War structure. India was the only country which said, no, Japan should be involved in regional, any dialogue. That's how India, Nehru, in a way, forced some of the Southeast Asians, please invite Japan, don't leave it out, bring it to the mainstream. So that's how Japan came to the famous Bandung Conference in 1955. Next, when every Asian country was looking at Japan, castigating Japan, what it did during the Second World War and all that, India was the only Asian country which said, no, that's not the way to, that's not the right approach to deal with Japan. Bring it into the mainstream. It supported Japanese participation in all the UN organizations. India was in the forefront. It supported all the Japanese efforts to get back into the mainstream. So that is the, you can see enormous, proactive initiatives that India undertook in getting Japan into the mainstream. That's the reason why India was the first country to get ODA. All others came much later. Okay, 1957. Of course, Cold War came, and I don't want to go into the history of Cold War. And then, that was a major, setback for bilateral relationship. So then I will skip I can come back to the post-Cold War. So initially, if you really look at, so many things had happened, in between for more than 35 years. And then economic reforms that India undertook in the early 1990s, Japanese were least interested. And then, unfortunately, it coincided with bursting of the economic bubble in Japan. And then certainly China was coming up in a big way. China and Southeast Asia were far more attractive than India for Japanese investments. And then generally it was India looked at, okay, it's poor country, poor infrastructure, hardly any opportunities for investment. And they even looked at India in the sense that, okay, India's look-east policy, okay, maybe India will become a competitor for Japan. So they cold-shouldered every move that India wanted to make. And then when things seems to be slightly improving, came 1998 nuclear tests. So again, relationships nosedived. That was the lowest phase probably ever in India-Japan relations. Sanctions were imposed, all sorts of things have happened. And then came Yoshihiro Mori's visit. That was the first turning point. So he really, he took a conscious decision, okay, hey, time to engage India. Okay, so let's forget about nuclear issue. Let's not talk about nuclear issue. They've done it in their interest. Let's look forward to other issues. For the first time, we talked about global partnership. Okay, so that was the beginning of a rebound in India-Japan relations. Two things prompted. And of course, American attitude started changing towards India. Secondly, fundamental shifts in East Asia. That was the beginning of, when the country started digesting the implications of rise of China. What is that China is going to do? There were a series of incidents in South China Sea, and all that I don't want to go into. But second most important was 2005 Koizumi's visit. I think that's a really, the real milestone. That really led to series of developments following. 8-point initiative really set the stage for bilateral relations to take off. So as a result of that, the story of India-Japan strategic partnership, that's what it's called. It's just a very recent one. It's hardly 80-year-old. But if you really look at the progress, it's enormous. Okay, that's because there were never any fundamental differences or problems between the two countries. Okay. Very quickly, there are three basic dimensions of bilateral relationship. One is global, one is regional, one is bilateral. Within bilateral, on which I'm going to concentrate more, is a political, there's defense strategic, there's economic. So these are broadly, the global, for the first time, talking about a global partnership. So UN Security Council, we started G4, and both are aspirants, and they started, working together, joint efforts and all that. And then UN peacekeeping operations, India has been one of the largest contributors. So that's some of these areas. And for the first time, India and Japan were talking to each other and bringing about nuclear disarmament. So that's very, very important to bring the issue of nuclear disarmament on the global agenda. And then joint efforts on combating weapons of mass destruction, and then a whole range of other issues at the global level, counterterrorism, promotion of democracy, disaster management, blah, blah, all that. At the regional level, in East Asia, the East Asia by then had become very, very significant. So what was happening in East Asia had an enormous impact, not only in Japan, but also in India. So they started talking about what could we do together in East Asia. So it's going to affect both the countries. So you could see enormous transformation in East Asia. You all familiar with that story of East Asia's rise and China's rise. 20% of trade, India's trade with East Asia, that's the largest. Okay, signed a large number of CEPAs and all sorts of economic cooperation agreements, including with Japan. Japan was one of the first. There's also regional peace and stability. Obviously, it would affect India, and of course, multipolarity and all that. I don't want to go into details of that. So you can see that every major declaration, bilateral declaration, you see mentioned to East Asia, Asia very prominently. It's not just bilateral. So Asia came into the picture quite prominently. Bilateral. If you really look at, politically, if you really look at the sheer number of institutional mechanisms that have been created between India and Japan, they are the largest. The largest institutional mechanisms that Japan ever created in its history is with India. I've given the list of that. Annual prime ministerial meetings. Earlier we used to meet, prime ministerial meetings used to take once in 10 years, 15 years before Modi came. Starting from 2007, we had 9 visits between the 2 prime ministers. And then there's an annual strategic dialogue between the foreign ministers level, consultations of national security advisors, and then 2+2 dialogue. India was the first country after the US and Australia to have a 2+2 dialogue with India. And then foreign secretary level, what we call vice ministerial level dialogues, foreign office consultations, annual comprehensive security dialogues at the level of Minister of Foreign Affairs and MOD, the maritime security dialogue, the dialogue on Africa, and the dialogue on cyber security. There's a separate mechanism to deal with the promotion of trade in advanced technologies, and energy dialogue, counter-terrorism dialogue, working group on counter-terrorism, and there's also annual track 1.5 dialogue. I mean, there are more are coming. There are 14 so far. This is to basically give thrust to the political links between the 2 countries. As a result of these political links, as a result of these institutional mechanisms, they will ensure that doesn't matter which government is in power, whether DPJ or LDP, even if it's a communist party, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter which party is in power in India. They will ensure that bilateral relations will remain very strong. So that's the whole idea of creating these institutional mechanisms. The second aspect of bilateral relationship is defense. Within defense and strategic area, there's a comprehensive security dialogue, annual comprehensive security dialogue. There's a defense policy dialogue. There is military two talks. There's regular visits by all the service chiefs. And every year they visit each other. There's joint maritime exercises, which used to be limited to Coast Guard, now Navy to Navy exercises. Trilateral exercises, which are renewed again this year, comprising India, US, and Japan. Exchange of military officers for training, which is again a recent development. And then coordination in the Indian Ocean on anti-piracy, the Gulf of Aden. For the first time, India and Japan and Navy started coordinating. And also for the first time, India might be the first country to buy a Japanese military aircraft. It's an amphibious aircraft. Negotiations are going on. Maybe it's quite possible that India will be the first country to buy an aircraft, a military equipment from Japan. And this is basically how to promote security cooperation between the 2 countries. Started in December 2009. Consolidation of global and strategic partnership, enhancement of information exchange policy, coordination and security issues in the Asia-Pacific region, and then promotion of open and transparent, inclusive regional cooperation in Asia, and cooperation in the regional multilateral mechanisms, ASEAN Regional Forum, and all sorts of East Asian mechanisms. Third aspect I'll come to quickly, the economic dimension. This is certainly should occupy the center stage in any bilateral relationship. This is if you look at the trade, bilateral trade, that gives an idea where it is headed in. Okay. while it is progressing, if you really look at last column, while it has been just given recent data, from 6.5 billion, it's about 18.1 the last year, okay, financial year. It has gone up by 3 times, 300% increase. But in terms of percentage share, it has virtually remained the same, both exports and imports. That is worrying, in terms of, at least from Indian point of view. So it's not really picking up, as much as one would expect. So that is the, out of the total imports, the share of Japan is only 2.5. Okay. FDI. FDI is quite considerable now. It used to be very, very tiny, very small. It is increasing. If you really look at 2001 and 0 and 1, about 12 years back, it was 223 million. So you can see steady, especially last few years, you can see this was probably acquisition of some company, but it is steadily increasing. So it is, the trajectory is becoming clear that FDI is going to increase from Japan. Absolutely no question about that. Okay, increasing as more and more projects come up, more and more Japanese companies get involved in India. Share, where do they invest in mostly? The largest investments so far have come in drugs and pharmaceuticals, 4.161 billion, which is 30%. Automobile, but unlike most people think automobile should attract more investment, but incidentally, drugs and pharmaceuticals is the largest. Service sector and the metallurgical industries and electrical equipment. This is broadly most of the major investments that have gone into Japanese FDI. So annual investments of the total investment, actual total investment was 12.66 between 2012. It's not much compared to Japanese investments, say in Southeast Asia or in Japan, in China, for instance. But it's remarkable progress when you compare to the past. Hardly we never had, except in one major investment that was Suzuki, a joint venture. So this accounted for about 7% of total inflows in India. Still it's very low, if you really look at it. But if you really look at country-wise, Japan is the 4th largest. You can see that. Okay. Someone mentioned about number of Japanese companies. I think Vishal mentioned in the morning about 10 years back, there were only 400 Japanese companies which are present, not necessarily invested in actual operations, which are registered. Today, by last count, it was 2011-12 data, 1,800 Japanese companies are located in India. So that's, you can see, remarkable improvement, at least showing interest in the Indian market. Okay. But more importantly, you see, while big companies increasing, they're showing a lot of interest, and they're there. All the big companies are there. But what really can consolidate India-Japan economic relationship is SMEs. These are very, very tiny. I don't have the breakdown, but this we need to attract. SMEs, Japanese SMEs. So that is lacking so far. There's huge potential for investment. There's no question about that. Okay. So despite all the problems, this is India is a fairly stable economy. It's a democratic country, fairly transparent, all the rules and regulations. There have been series of surveys done by Japan Bank for International Cooperation all the time. Last 3 years certainly, they always come out that India ranked top among promising countries according to JBIC surveys. And overall stood second after China across the world. China number 1, most preferable. Number 2 is India. Okay, overall, all. More Japanese and Korean companies make money in India than in China. This is a fact. I said in the morning, Sony makes money in India, is losing money in most other markets. It's a fact that more Japanese and even Korean companies make money in India than in any other country. Okay. Of course, there are problems. I'm not denying that there are no problems. We have corruption, we have bureaucratic delays. Land acquisition is a major problem, highly sensitive issue, environmental clearances, all sorts of problems are there. But it's not easy to overcome. There one can always find a way. ODA. ODA is very important. In a way, it reflects about a country's economic potential as well as how close politically the country is. Okay, clearly look at it. 2000 onwards, it's about 189 million. Okay, but if you come here by 2010, it has crossed 2 billion. That's an indication of Japanese interest in India. Starting from 2003 onwards, India has been the largest ODA recipient in the world. Moreover, ODA allocations are shrinking. We all know the story of that. But in the case of India, they're growing up. So that indicates you something about India's potential as an economic partner, as a political partner. So this is basically, I'm explaining that. If you really look at 36 billion aid we have got so far. That's larger than China. China got only 35 billion. 36 billion, and it's growing up. The next several years is going to grow up. I mentioned already about Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement. It's the most comprehensive economic partnership agreement that two countries have ever signed. Okay? So as a result of that, trade is growing and investments are growing. But this is the fact that they have signed this comprehensive agreement is very, very important. It covers not just the trade, it covers goods, services, investment, movement of persons, all sorts of intellectual property rights, custom procedures, and other related issues. It also envisages abolition of 94% on tariffs between the two countries in the next 10 years. It was signed in 2011. So by 2021, 94% of items will be traded between India and will be without tariffs. So that's going to really give enormous boost to the bilateral trade. I'll give some mega projects. If you really look at one of them is DMIC. Some of you may have heard. So Delhi, India, Delhi, Mumbai Industrial Corridor. This is a huge project spread over 1,500 kilometers. And the initial investments in the next couple of one decade or so is going to be 100 billion. It is Japanese sponsored project. Japan is one of the major backers of this project. So JICA is it's JICA's largest project anywhere in the world. This project. Okay. High-speed transportation, it will include all sorts of things. Network, state-of-the-art ports, airports, special economic zones, industrial areas, parks, transshipment hubs, knowledge parks, townships, you name it, smart cities, blah, blah, all that. That's number one. It's already being implemented. The second one, which is on the planning stage, is Chennai-Bangalore Industrial Corridor. So it is 560 kilometers spread across 3 South Indian states. So preliminary studies are being done. Large number of Japanese companies are located in this part. Nearly 2/3 of Japanese companies are located already in this corridor. So this corridor is going to acquire a lot of importance in the coming years. There are two more major projects where Japan is involved very actively. One is Delhi-Mumbai dedicated rail freight corridor. Other one is Delhi-Kolkata dedicated rail freight corridor. These two would be about 10 billion together, about 5 billion each, where Japan has committed to invest in that. Okay. So total cost will be about 10 billion. Japan is also pressing for Shinkansen. So they just signed an agreement when Prime Minister Abe came. So Shinkansen, they're really pitching for very strong for Shinkansen. So India is hesitant because of huge costs. Shinkansen is very expensive to build. Okay. So but it is willing to start one line between two lines rather between Mumbai and Ahmedabad and Delhi and Amritsar to test out whether it's possible to start one in India. I want to look beyond the traditional pharmaceuticals and talking about drugs and automobiles and electrical products and all that. I think we should really look beyond that. Really look at three potential areas. The fourth one I have not mentioned, but I can deal with that. One is agriculture. There's huge potential for agricultural cooperation. Japan is the most mechanized agricultural country in the world. And the per capita the per hectare productivity, rice or wheat is highest in the world. There's fantastic technology available for in the agriculture sector, but that is least explored area, unfortunately. There's a huge potential. Second one is R&D. R&D. India has got huge human resources. You have shortage of people. Please outsource your R&D to India. Okay. There's already there's one pharmaceutical company which does its research. They outsource research to India. Small company, because it's much cheaper to do research in India. You get it done. Clinical trials, you get them done in India. You get the result here. Okay. So there's huge potential for R&D. I'm just giving only pharmaceutical, but in automobiles, automobile R&D, Suzuki, which used to have 100% R&D facility here, 100%, almost 80% they have shifted to India. Because it's much cheaper to do that. And you have huge human resources base available. So you can think of any number of areas in terms of R&D cooperation. The other one is education. We have huge, unrealized potential. There are 90,000 Chinese students studying in Japan, whereas there are not even 400 Indian students studying in Japan. There's something is fundamental wrong in the way we market our each other. Whereas there are 100,000 Indian students studying in the US. They're all over in Canada, in Australia, in New Zealand. But why are they not coming to Japan? So there is enormous scope for cooperation in the educational area. So we need to really tap that. The fourth area is civil and nuclear cooperation. If you want, I'll give you more details about that, but we can discuss.
We have lots of Indian students in the United States.
100,000.
Yeah. Most of them will not really return to India so easily.
That's fine.
Does your government consider some of the special programs like the China 1K program, that means 1,000, the educated person should be recruited back to the China. China government already put lots of the budget on these issues. How about the Indian government situation?
No, there's no program as such. Because we don't have shortage of people. We have plenty. For every engineer, there are 10 engineers who are ready to replace him. So we don't have shortage of people. So we don't need to attract. So all those people who have gone out, they're doing so extremely well. Let them be there. There are some 20 companies with turnover or what is the revenue of more than 10 billion, which are headed by Indians, including Microsoft. Just 2 weeks back, one Indian is from my place, so he's been appointed as CEO of Microsoft. Okay, so we are not really concerned about their return. We have plenty of people at home. So there's no program as such, no plan to attract them. But if there are opportunities, a lot of people come back. Because now market offering opportunities. There are a lot of people who come back. Okay, but a lot of people also go out. So no restriction as such. Some of these minor details, but interesting for you. For instance, it's the only country. It was talked about in the morning, which is allowed, we want Japan to invest in sensitive Northeast. It's a very, very sensitive area. We have huge problems, insurgency and China border and all that. But Japan is the only country. For a long time, even the Indians could not go there. We had needed permission from the military and all that. But now, of course, they have relaxed all that. But Japan has been invited to invest in and develop this region. So that's a special privilege that Japan has been given. Second, while all the other foreign agencies are subjected to government scrutiny, Japan Foundation is exempt. It's the only foundation in India. They don't have to show their accounts to the government, how they spend, how much money comes, how much money goes in. I'm just giving an example of how, like, the confidence levels between the two countries. There's also, I told you, there's total consensus all across all the political parties. Doesn't matter which political party comes. When it comes to Japan, there will not be any controversy. There will not be any change of opinion. That is for sure. Okay. And the Indian Prime Minister, basically he was reflecting the current situation between India and Japan. He said India is at the heart of Japan, India's look-east policy. There's no question about that. Similarly, he also said Japan is the most important bilateral partner to India in East Asia. That's all. There's no question about that. Why? What is that that makes India-Japan relationship so great? Why is it so special? Fortunately, we don't talk about history. There's no historical baggage. We don't have to absolutely forget about history. So we can always look forward to, not look back into the history. No fundamental clash of interest. Absolutely, we don't feel that there's a clash of interest between India and Japan. That's how exactly Japanese feel. Unlike other countries in this part of the world, they shared common values and interests. Democracy is one. Human rights, respect to human rights is the other. So many shared values. Commonality of views and range of issues. I don't want to go into detail. So don't look at China. China is only one factor. China is not determining the kind of relationship India and Japan are developing. China is one small factor. China is a significant factor, but it's not the only factor. There's so many other factors. I told you global, regional, bilateral, economic, political, strategic, so many issues are there. Okay? It's a potential common adversary, cannot be alone help genuine strategic partnership. If you want to really build strategic partnership, long-term strategic partnership, it cannot base on one issue. That will be too fragile, too weak. It will collapse. What if tomorrow Japan's relations become very good with China? Does it mean that India's relations will can push it to the background? So that's the reason why you cannot build genuine strategic partnership which is based on one issue or two issues. It has to be really broad-based. That's the whole effort. That's entirely, it has to be broad-based, comprising political, strategic, economic, and other issues. That's exactly what they are trying to do. That's where it is headed. Okay, relatively low level of economic links. This is the weakest link. Unfortunately, there's a need to strengthen economic links. We have excellent political relations, excellent defense and security cooperation, but economic links are still very, very weak. So this needs to be strengthened. A strong Japan. This is a basic conviction. A strong Japan is in our interest. There's no question about that. Similarly, I'm sure a strong India is in your interest. These are some of the broad conclusions. Long history of mutual empathy and appreciation between India and Japan. East Asian developments, a critical role in helping forging strategic partnership. India's economic and strategic stakes in East Asia. India, they're really growing in a big way. And the commonality of interests and concerns, this is reflected in all you need, look at the joint statements the last 7-8 years. Okay, Koizumi-san, when he came, it was called 8-point initiative. There were only 8 points. Look at when the most recent one in January when Abe-san came to India. There were 45, 46 points. Now that's an indication of how areas are being, how cooperation are being expanded. That's how the relationship is headed. We support certainly a strong, strategically autonomous Japan. There's no question about that. Okay, regardless of political parties in power, India-Japan relations will remain partners in molding a new East Asian order. Okay, China is a significant factor, but not the only one. Genuine partnership cannot be built based on China. Urgent need to realize the full potential of strategic partnership that also advances East Asia's security and economic prosperity. It's not just bilateral. We also keep in mind the East Asian security and economic prosperity of the region. Okay, so we benefit together in this exercise. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, we have a Q&A session.
Thank you, Professor. You mentioned the Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor project. As a project management professional, researcher, and also I got involved in the early stage of that project from Japan side. I'm interested in how it is behaving. According to the original program schedule, it should have been completed this year, but apparently it's been delayed, partially from the Japan side. One of the reasons for the delay is Japanese turbulence after triple disaster, tsunami, and the lack of leadership of the former Democratic Party. But as a symbolic program of G2G, Japan-India strategic partnership, we should get it done. How do you, Indian government, as well as industry, evaluate the current status of Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor program? As you mentioned, JBEC has tremendous success in Delhi Metro and other infrastructure projects like NTGC's power plant. So as the researcher having close contact with India, I'm asking this question.
See, as you rightly pointed out, DMIC, Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor project suffered for two reasons. One is the disaster here. So that really, one reason. But there are bigger reasons from Indian side. One is land acquisition. Biggest problem has been the land acquisition. Only now I think they just passed a law about land acquisition. It's been a very sensitive issue. If you acquire land, always there's a feeling that you are not compensating enough from those people. And they go to the court and they'll be delayed and all sorts of problems. So that's been one of the major problems. The other problem is that when the industrial corridor started taking some shape, so more and more states wanted, hey, why don't you shift it a little bit, include my state as well, and include my state. So that it got, in a way, got caught up in the political kind of issues. All those issues have been settled now. Most of the land has been acquired, and it's making a lot of progress. You can go to the website, you can get all the details.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So it is delayed, but it is on. Yeah, certainly there's no question about that. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Well, thank you very much for nice presentation today. I'd like to ask you one thing. As you may know that Japan is getting creating the huge debt, national debt. So therefore, the Japanese government does not have sufficient money to invest in any countries. But let's suppose, if the Japanese government might have around $1 billion for India. Do you think the Japanese government, how Japanese government should spend such $1 million for India? One of the ideas is to improve the infrastructure in India. The other one is to make the Indian industry stronger. Other idea, that is my hope, is to make the so-called bottom of the pyramid gets a better quality of life. How do you, there are three cases I have in my mind. Could you suggest us which one seem to be better, seem to be the good, considering the relation between India and Japan?
ODA has been basically for infrastructure development. Either it's China, in Southeast Asia, anywhere. So in India also, virtually the entire aid is basically for infrastructure development, more than 95%. So we need, our infrastructure is still poor, we need huge investments, we have our loan limitations, and that's exactly the reason why we want more and more ODA. And also, this is, ODA is one part of infrastructure development. DMIC itself, it's a kind of huge infrastructure project. Okay. The first, the phase is going to be 100 billion, but eventually they said anything between 200 to 250 billion. So that's going to be one huge infrastructure project. Ports and airports and e-cities and all sorts of smart towns and you name it. Similarly, another corridor they're talking about, Bangalore, Chennai. That's where I come from. So I have a lot of interest in that region. So there's huge potential there. But Bangalore, Chennai, that's an IT hub in what we call Silicon Valley. So most of the Japanese automobiles are located. Most of the Japanese trading companies are located. Most of the Japanese IT, back office, IT-related companies are located there. So that's going to be another major corridor. Okay. So that's another infrastructure project. Okay. So ODA, basically, we need still a lot of ODA to develop our infrastructure. In terms of industry, I think let the industries take care of themselves. So I'm sure corporate sector knows how to make money. So let them. We create the facilities. I think they will do it themselves. About improving the quality of life, I think we should leave it to the governments. That's their job. Let them do. It might create problems if you get into that. So that's the only thing I can say about that. Okay.
Well, one interesting story that Japan and India have started joint initiative to penetrate base of the pyramid, as well as light infrastructure building in African countries.
Yes. I mentioned. Yeah,
Japan and France have started joining forces. For instance, Senegal, where
right.
France aid agency, FDA, Japan, JICA joining together. And it's very good for Japan and India to not look at Japan, Indian domestic market,
right.
But you have capability, Indians, like structured steel, you have global competitiveness.
Right.
So that's why you export in fabricated structured steel or module to the Middle East.
Right.
So there is some room for us to cooperate in that direction.
That's already happening. I mentioned Japan-India dialogue on Africa. Yeah. So that's exactly what they're talking about. India is second largest investor in last 10 years in Africa. And Japan is is coming up in a big way in terms of investment. That's exactly to coordinate their activities in Africa. They started this Africa-India.
In Africa.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
There are so many Indians.
There are so many Indians, yeah. We have tremendous advantage in Africa. Indians, and we have old connections with Africa. So that's exactly the reason why there is a very close cooperation between India and Japan. The dialogue is meant precisely for that.
My question is related to the concept of the Indo-Pacific. We are familiar with the concept Asia-Pacific, East Asia, etc., etc. So could you give some comments to how important the concept is? Or how useful?
No, it is, at least from my personal perspective, I think it's a very, very useful framework to look at these developments. And so what happens in the Indian Ocean, you cannot separate from what happens in the Pacific Ocean. There's a close connection. So that's the whole idea. So India itself is till very recently, India was not a factor in East Asia. Today, India is a significant factor. Okay? So in 1993, 94, 92, 93, when all these countries were talking about the creation of ASEAN Regional Forum, India was not included at all. When 94, when it was launched, when India approached, they said politely, we don't think you are that important to be included in the ASEAN Regional Forum. But things have changed so much now. Okay? So that's exactly the reason why we need to look beyond, narrower concepts like East Asia. East Asia itself, is a vague concept. East Asia Summit did not include USA. No, it includes USA. It includes Russia. So maybe, we should look at things a little bit more differently. If you bring in India, India Pacific, framework, probably we'll have, a lot more to cooperate, especially between India and Japan, than restricting to East Asia. So that's the reason why I'm trying to promote this Indo-Pacific idea. We created.
Yeah, actually, in Australia, well, even English-speaking people refer to Australia as down under. But if you were in Australia, you find maps where upside down, right?
You're
With
right.
Australia at the top.
Right.
Say Russians in the bottom, they
Oh,
say.
that's right.
So that's the way you think your country is center of the world.
That's right.
Any other questions?
Thanks for your presentation. Now I'm involved in supporting Japanese SMEs to do business outside Japan. And you mentioned that challenge is to get SMEs into India. I heard that also introduction of SMEs to Indian market is very important for job creation. So what do you think about this issue for the future?
About SMEs, Japanese SMEs. So that's a problem. See, I don't know the too many details about that. So one of the problems, I believe Japanese are facing is that somehow they think it's an alien, place. They find it, psychologically, too far to go and invest in India. So what's happening is that the big industry when they come, especially automobiles, some of the SMEs they come along with them to produce the spare parts, along with the local partner. But Japan is known for SMEs. It's a large number of SMEs which went to China, for instance. Similarly, they are not coming to India, so far at least. Hopefully, Japanese government can play a role. They can facilitate their, provide more information and, facilitate them to coming to India. And I think, and plus, of course, the JICA, JBIC, they can really, JETRO, all these organizations can play a major role. There's a lot of talk about attracting SMEs, but on the ground level, still it's very minuscule. Japanese SMEs.
I think I have two questions. The first question is, what can India and Japan accomplish legally when Japan is so tied in its relation with the U.S. and India has a tradition of non-alignment? Does its reputation of the recognition of the strategic partnership, or is there something more semi-legal in India's relation with Japan? The second question is it possible to strengthen Indian-Japanese relations independent of India's relations with Southeast Asia, especially like Taiwan, Philippines, Vietnam, Indonesia? I mean, these countries are the countries that are on the way from India to Japan. It is very natural that that Japan and India try to approach to each other, but these Southeast Asia are very delicate areas where China may not like such approach between India and Japan. So I wonder what is your opinion about the independence, relative independence of India-Japanese relations?
If you really look at the first question about U.S. factor, you have different kind of relations with USA. We have different kind of relationship, but it's not like the Cold War. Cold War, we were totally estranged. Absolutely, our relationship was the rock bottom with USA, and that reflected in India-Japan relationship. So that has changed. So much so that today we are exercising together. The trilateral exercises. India, Japan, USA. So USA, India, we have a strategic partnership. And the largest number of defense cooperation arrangements USA has got is with India, not any of, not even Japan. So we have a different kind of, special relations with USA. So that, and there's also, trilateral dialogue, which is, Chinese are very, very unhappy with that. India, Japan, USA trilateral dialogue. It is Japanese initiative, strategic dialogue. Okay. So all these factors actually complement each other. I don't think they really, contradict each other. Non-alignment is not an issue at all. Nobody talks about non-alignment. So you should have Cold War to be non-aligned. There's no Cold War, so there's no question of alignment and non-alignment doesn't arise at all. Okay. The question of advancing a country's interests. So that's no more an issue in the foreign policy of India today. So there's absolutely nothing that really comes in between India and Japan in forging close relationship. Because I told you there's no contradictions, no clash of interests, there's a commonality of interests, in fact. So there's we share a lot of things together. So that is the impetus for Japan and India strategic partnership, economic, political, strategic, and all that. Southeast Asia, some countries strategically speaking, I know for sure, at least on the track 2 level, Vietnamese have been strongly pushing for close links between India, Japan, and Vietnam. Okay, you're much familiar with Vietnam. So there a lot of things are happening at some level, between. There's also move to bring in Philippines now. So Americans want, okay, you guys talk, but let the Philippines also come, because there are certain issues on which you can share together. Maybe in the future, Indonesia is one of the countries which has been talked about, on purely on the strategic kind of thing. This may be one way of looking at East Asian balance of power, how to deal with a rising China. What will you do if China becomes too aggressive or too assertive? So you need to have some mechanism to check China's rise, China's attitude. This may be one of them, in addition to other things. So that's probably one of the reasons why Americans want India to get involved more and more. They're really pushing India to don't look east, engage east, and that's what Hillary Clinton said. Please get involved more and more in East Asia. Your stakes are high. All the action is going to be in East Asia. So that's going to be that's how I look at it. Some of the Southeast Asian countries are going to really get closer to India.
Thank you very much for your very valuable information of your lecture. I very often visit India and lecture business people on management, and always, without any exception, I really feel a very warm attitude toward me as a Japanese. And in spite of the fact that we, Japan, indirectly fought against India. And I don't think any people in Japan consider that fighting is between Japan and India, but rather we fight against England.
That's right.
And so in that incident itself does not have any instance, any negative influence over our psychology, I mean our Indians and Japanese. And I think the relationship between Japan and India is extremely unique. Looking at any other, any relationship of other two countries in the world. That means that our relationship, or at least the good feeling of Indian people toward us, Indian, like looking at almost 50 years ago that the prince and princess visited India. That time it's only less than 10 years after the World War II.
Right.
Yet they receive, Indian people provided us, the couple, the warmest invitation and treatment all through their stay. And again, they did the same to the Emperor and Empress last December. And so I think we, Indian and Japanese people, really consider that we have a very special relationship. It's nothing to do with economics, politics, or anything, but it's, I would rather say it is a very much of empathical relationship. And we really should keep esteeming this relationship. And the last October, I was lecturing in India, and taking advantage of Emperor and Empress's visit to India, we thought we should do something. And then looking at the education, I was really surprised that each year we receive about 800 Indian students to Japan. And in return, we are sending only 80, less than 100 students, young people, to India. And I was really surprised and disappointed by that number. And we really need to do something to increase that. And you talked about a little bit of education. It's nothing to do with the fact that we, the Japanese young people, do not like India or anything. They just don't have enough information. So I think we should find out some way to stimulate young people of both countries to develop more interests in the relationship of our countries. And therefore that there are a lot of things we can do, but if you have any idea how to stimulate the young people of two countries to develop more interest and sincere interest in each country, I would very much appreciate that. I have been working with Mr. Mori. He is regarded as a king to the relationship of India and Japan. So I hope that he can give us some support to our idea. But if you have any thought about with respect to stimulating young people, also interest in each country, I really appreciate it. Maybe we can talk later. But,
Sure.
Yeah, but I really appreciate all the historical evidence you provided us with today, and I will certainly use all of this information whenever I talk to my young people. And I thank you very much.
Okay. So one of the problems we face with Japanese is that, forget about India, they are not even going to the US. I mean, their numbers are shrinking, Some of Japanese students don't want to go out. I don't know, why. I mean, earlier, the large number of Japanese students used to go out, especially to US. The numbers are shrinking. So I don't know. I don't have immediate ideas on how to promote. Probably, Japanese government, maybe Mombusho can step in and give liberal scholarships. And if you go to India, you are assured of scholarship. You don't have to spend from your pocket. Something like that. Maybe one of the issues. And probably, the university to university exchange, bilateral arrangements could be one. And institute to institute, IITs, Indian Institute of Technologies, they're top notch in the world. They're some of the best in the world. So maybe, that if they could, some seats we'll reserve for Japanese students who can come and study here, with assured scholarship. Probably that could, one batch comes, the others will come to know, okay, we can go and study in India. It's much cheaper, and we'll get quality education. That one can think of any number of things, something like that. But in our university, we have certain quota reserved for foreign students. So we do get, but not many Japanese, but Koreans. I have in my class this year one Singaporean, 2 Thais, 1 Cambodian. So, but no Japanese, unfortunately. In a small class of 15 students, so that's an indication of growing interest in educational system. It's certainly cheap, much cheaper than any of those other countries normally, traditionally people go to.
I think it is going to be the subject of the next session. But so far as the business, many people talk about develop more of economic relationship and strategic alliance and so on and so on. But I think these are okay because, for example, business people, so far as they would find business opportunities, they go anywhere.
That's right.
So we can just let them
right.
as they do and they wish. But in terms of exchange of young people, I would say not only the university but high school students. I think somebody should take initiative. Otherwise, we could not just let young people to decide or to ask, just keep asking them to promote more interest in India or Japan. But we really should, we the adults should take some initiative and stimulate young people to develop their interests. So if you could share my my concern and interest, I would appreciate that.
Certainly, I share that.
Do you have any additional suggestion? For example, it used to be some kind of Indian culture absorbed the mind of the Western people, including the Beatles and other rock singer. The Indian culture is so influential in 1960s or 70s. But one generation after the kind of interest might decrease. And you mentioned the Indian efforts to show their culture to the world is much less than the Confucius school of Chinese efforts. So maybe that kind of thing. Any additional idea available?
I mean, certainly China, I believe, spends every year about $1 billion on promotion of Confucian studies. We don't have that kind of money as of now. But one of the things probably India could do is start more and more cultural centers to begin with. At least let people know that what is Indian culture. Secondly, movies. Indian movies is the largest movie industry in the world, and and after Bollywood, they're the most popular films across the world. I believe they watch even in Latin America, Africa, Central Asia, Southeast Asia. At least I know in Indonesia there used to be 2 theaters dedicated to Indian movies. So you have huge potential. What we call soft power potential in terms of using the movies to spread India and the awareness about India or Indian culture. They don't really reflect entirely, but at least people come to know what is India like to an extent. So movies can really play a major role. Yeah.
Additional comments?
Expanding Professor Yahagi's discussions, I had 7, 8 times training Indian executive during 1 day and 1.5 day workshop about innovation project, program management. Delegates from Indian Oil Corporation, ONGC, Gas Authority of India, BrahMos, that's missile companies. They are department manager level or higher. I found the very interesting word. We are grounded about thought. Certainly those senior managers in corporate India, they're very much grounded and don't try to go beyond the given framework of thought, right? So one thing is that I think schools, including professors, should be careful. Don't to be a capping stone for, supposedly innovative young Indian talents. I'm saying because I'm teaching in France, at French business school, those Indian master students, some are PhD students, they have very good leadership and very helpful to us teachers, right? And have initiative and proactive. So being grounded or being conservative is not just a stereotype of all Indian intellectual persons. So probably try to listen, let's check whether there is some capping stone, right? And the other thing is that I think India by this time should have introduced callback Indians educated overseas program. That should change India's speed of, global competitiveness. Thank you.
You're right, absolutely right.
Sorry, I'm taking a little time of yours, but referring to Professor Tanaka's points, I think Indian people, very generally speaking, or maybe the Indians people's basic philosophy has a much, much longer time span. And in that respect, we, not only Japan, but also all other countries of the world, should consult with Indian philosophers, especially in the case of nuclear power plants. I have been always so much frustrated by the arguments between the pro and anti-nuclear powers. And they talk only about the risk or the problems of operation of nuclear power plants. But I always insist, and I wrote a couple of articles in the newspaper, but it was not so positively welcomed by the Japanese economic circle. That is, the issue of a nuclear power plant is not the mechanical problems of plants like Fukushima. That's kind of created by the human errors. But the substantial substance of the problem is that more of the philosophical issue, that is the waste of the nuclear plants, even they operate without any problems throughout the life of like 40, 50 years. The waste of those nuclear plants, even if we would calculate the very easily, the level of radioactivity of wastes would go down to the level of natural radioactivity.
Right.
It would take more than 40 million years, but nobody talks about that, okay? And that's a very philosophical issue. That is whether or not we, the current generation, just for the sake of our affluence, do we have the right to put all those descendants of next 40 million years or 50 million years at the risk of receiving the high radio activity, or actually the threat of receiving that high radioactivity, but nobody discusses about that. And all the experts say that if they would put all the waste below the earth, like 800 meters these days, it's the end of every problem. But that's not. And like Mr. Koizumi said that we don't have that place to store in the earth, that only Finland and Sweden. But that's not the issue. You know, the real issue is that whether or not we the current generation, has a right to put all our descendants in that at the risk. But so in that type of thought, Indian people should have the more advantage, because historically you have been thinking all the issues on the much, much longer time span. So I really would like to have Indian people to join our discussion on the nuclear plant issue.
Is there such a debate among the Indian policymakers or researchers?
Quickly, there is, you have, like in Japan, there is also pro and anti, nuclear, debate that's going on in India. It's a complex issue. On the one side, exactly the same argument. Do I have the right to put, my next generation, following several hundreds of generations at risk? What right do I have? If something goes wrong, who knows? At the same time, people say that forget about the future. Why are you worried about 40 million later? You worry about today. The people who don't have electricity, you provide them electricity. I mean, this is, I know you're right. It has to be approached in a different fashion, not simply cost-benefit analysis or whatever. One should really think through from a long-term perspective. It's more of a philosophical question than you're right. It's a very fascinating idea. I must appreciate you. It never occurred to me. I can.
Professor Singh may have the...
Yeah, please, by all means.
Thank you. Because we in India are looking forward to Japanese technology in nuclear power generation, I thought I should respond to your comment. Yes, there is no denying that there are consequences of nuclear power generation. But let me put few points for your consideration. If you look at planet Earth, which is a spheroid, it contains inside it more dangerous things than nuclear waste. Mount Fuji is an example. It comes out different places and those places become inhabitable forever, which is not an excuse that we should create nuclear waste just because there is more dangerous things inside our spheroid. But then there are more pressing needs. India has 400 million people which have no access to electricity. A similar number with no access to clean water, which is related to energy generation and facilitation of water distribution and water purification. What do we do with that? Third point, India is not like France or Japan going in a big way for nuclear power generation. Indeed, as we have repeatedly said, we are very grounded in our civilizational sense, and therefore we are not in any sector going full speed. We are not going full speed in any sector. So also in nuclear power generation, we are not going full speed like Japan did, or like France did, like Germany did. And part of economic development in Germany and Japan can be related to nuclear power generation being available. We want to also achieve a certain level of development. And as I said, we are not going full speed into nuclear power generation. So far, we have less than 3% of electricity generation in India based on nuclear power generation. If our dreams were to come true, which is very difficult imagination, in India particularly dreams don't easily come true. If dreams come true, then nuclear power generation will contribute about 10%. By 2050, if we achieve all our plans, nuclear power generation will still be only 10% of India's electricity generation. So it's not in a big way, except I think what we have to really remember, for India, that 10% would mean $300 billion worth of nuclear reactors, number 35 nuclear reactors in India. Now for Japanese, that looks like, wow, huge. So Japanese, Koreans, French, Russians, Americans, everybody can chip in and sell. But for India, it is only less than 10%. So if we have to provide for our people, we have to look at all options possible. When we look at nuclear power generation, we are not negating other sectors. In fact, 53% of power generation is through coal, which is polluting. So every power generation will have some issue. Big hydropower dams, flooding issue, removal of villages. We have controversies on big dams. People don't want to move from their village to another settlement. So India has tremendous challenges, and I think we need a very good understanding from Japanese as to why do we need nuclear power generation technology from all countries, and I think Japan should be a good partner in supplying that technology to India. Thank you.
Is that all right? Okay. Make it short, please.
Yeah, that's a very good point. But Yet when we thought about like fairness in terms of the quality of economy and the level of development and so on, it seems very difficult to deny nuclear power. But it does not answer the philosophical issue I developed. Nobody could respond to that. Nobody tried to answer that philosophical question. And also, one more thing is that whenever we talk about nuclear power, somehow, I mean, I know the reason, but many people assume or just take it for granted that the technology is fission-based nuclear power. Okay, there is another fusion-based nuclear power that is safe. Okay, the waste is only helium gas and water.
But we don't have it as of
now.
We don't have fusion technology as of now.
Well, we do in France.
Yeah.
There is a huge project going on. Okay.
ITER.
But they don't talk about that, and the reason is okay, that technology does not bring a lot of profits to the industries. Only the hardware manufacturers, they make nuclear plants, but others none. Okay, because it's safe. So there are a lot of things we could solve economic problems, you mentioned, without using fission-based nuclear power. And that's why I say that we should first talk about the philosophical issue, so that we could eliminate anything which would be abide by the philosophical answer. Then, obviously, nuclear power is the only available power which would be feasible to take care of our economic needs. But yet we have fusion technology. Okay, so that's my point.
No, I fully concur with you in the sense ITER project is there. The progress is so slow. Even India is participating, Japan is participating, ITER in France. I mean, there is a huge. Yeah, it's all the governments, all the experimental ITER project.
In Rosatom in Russia, and they are sending people to that French new generation of reactor.
Okay. And fission technology, other. That's right.
They say at the U.S. Congress, they declare that they would not go into the fusion technology because they cannot make money enough. And of course, from a point of view of nuclear power, the nuclear bomb, of course we need plutonium. And that is the output of a nuclear fission-based nuclear power. So from that point of view, current technology is very important if you want to have a nuclear bomb. But if we do not, then that's nothing. We can rather go for the fusion-based nuclear power.
Okay.
So I would have expected the Japanese Prime Minister would start initiating that argument, but somehow that he wanted to sell Japanese nuclear power plants to any country, and that's stupid. And I have been extremely disappointed by Japanese leaders, not only the current Prime Minister, but the previous Prime Minister as well. Immediately after he declared that the UN to export.
That's right.
But that's really a shame of ours. In history, I think it was to Prime Minister's.
Okay. So we can continue the discussion in the business part sessions. And also this is related to the philosophical ground of technology. And is that all right? Okay, thank you very much, Professor Naidu. And we will continue the discussion over the third session.
Sure.
Thank you very much. We are behind the 30 minutes of the schedule, but we will have the recess for several minutes. We will start again at 4:30. Is that all right? 4:30.